Good afternoon. My name is Megan Fields, and I'm going to be presenting on Amnesty International and the Refugee Nation and the campaign they ran during the 2016 Summer Olympics in Brazil. Now, I am going to preface this with the Refugee Nation, who this focuses on, is technically listed as a separate NGO from Amnesty International. However, it is often cited as having the support of Amnesty International. And in a Forbes interview with two of the PR practitioners who worked on this campaign, the interview mentions that Amnesty International is the one who approached the PR agency with objectives. As a result of that source, I am citing Amnesty International as the organization behind the campaign and as the organization that I am going to be giving background information and the like on. So let's get started. Background on Amnesty International. It is a London-based organization that was started up in 1961 by lawyer Peter Benenson. And according to its website, it is a, quote, global movement of more than 7 million people in over 150 countries and territories who campaign to end abuses of human rights. So, for example, if you look at Amnesty International's website, they have a set of issues that they deal with and issues that they look for and causes that they work on. There's about 14 to 15 causes. They range from anywhere from like the refugee crisis to the death penalty to their consulting efforts with the United Nations. So their mission, vision, and value statements can all be found on the Amnesty International's website. The mission statement picture right there, it's a rather long mission statement, comes from a downloaded report from Amnesty International's website. And so I won't read the full thing for you, but the first statement that incorporates a bit of their vision and their mission statement is, quote, Amnesty International's vision is of a world in which every person enjoys all of the human rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international human rights instruments. In pursuit of this vision, Amnesty International's mission is to undertake research and action focused on preventing and ending grave abuses of these rights, end quote. For their values, quote, Amnesty International forms a global community of human rights defenders based on the principles of international solidarity, effective action for the individual victim, global coverage, and universality and indivisibility of human rights, impartiality and independence, and democracy and mutual respect, end quote. So the particular problem that Amnesty International was trying to combat here was that, according to Amnesty International's website and some of the material for the Refugee Nation as well, there are 65 million displaced people in the world. And so Amnesty International wanted to address this particular issue and saw an opportunity when the International Olympic Council introduced a team of refugees into the 2016 Summer Olympic Games. According to certain sources, the IOC was interested in increasing inclusivity in this event, since these athletes would not have been able to participate under their own on their home country's team. So it was opening up the ability for more athletes to participate and to give a section of people who would ordinarily have been excluded a chance to step up and participate in such a global event. So, a SWOT analysis for Amnesty International. Their strengths include the fact that they have a high credibility due to the international support and respect of the United Nations. So, like, according to Amnesty International's website, they consult with the UN. A second strength would be that the staff that works for Amnesty International has a ton of experience in relevant fields for their causes. For example, they've got a lot of legal experience on their team regarding these different causes that they fight for. Another strength that can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, so you'll see it there under weaknesses as well, is that Amnesty International depends on donations, which can be good because this keeps Amnesty International from being biased by any one government. It keeps them impartial. And much like, for the support of the UN, it gives them a little more credibility. However, it also is going to fall into the weaknesses category, because if people decide to stop donating and to, stop supporting the cause, maybe because they don't like one of the particular causes that Amnesty International supports, or maybe because they don't like how Amnesty International approached one of these causes, then the organization can't function. Another weakness would be that many of their stances can be considered polarizing, and that people's responses can depend on their political or worldviews, and that as a result, Amnesty International may face backlash depending on what they support or how, which is, a weakness anywhere, and it's not a surprise given their mission statement. It's inherently part of the territory. It's just something to consider when they step into a field and, how they approach things that this could generate negative media publicity, or it's something to watch out for, basically. But it's just something that comes with the territory. It's not like an inherently bad thing. So for opportunities, one potentially good thing is that Amnesty International's causes, since they are so heavy on human rights, these stories are particularly newsworthy, and depending on how major and how much they affect different people in the world, the media would be extremely likely to focus on them, and so they can gain a lot of media attention that way. One other example of an opportunity would be there's a growing interest in stepping up, taking action, protesting, and getting politically involved. For example, I saw a Washington Post article recently that talked a lot about how there was a sharp uptick in protests and marches and the like especially between March and April this year in the US. And this sort of mindset is what the opportunity is. This idea of being more active, getting more politically involved. If people have this mindset now of being more involved, Amnesty International can use it as an opportunity to recruit more people to their cause, get their name out there, get more people involved. A third opportunity for Amnesty International is the increase in technology and technological advances, because it makes connections easier. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, these are connecting influencers and people who can help the cause all across the world. And it also makes it a lot easier to expose human rights violations. So you can take the causes that you see in front of you every day and put them onto social media, put them out there, show the world what's going on in real time. Certain threats might be, for example, that, like I said, Amnesty International's got about 14 or 15 different cause pages on their website. So with that many causes to focus on, Amnesty International may need to prioritize to avoid spreading their resources too thin, because if they don't prioritize correctly, they may not be able to juggle everything. Something may slip between the cracks. And another threat facing Amnesty International and any NGO is legal requirements across different countries, which can restrict what Amnesty International can do. For example, on Amnesty International's website, there is a May 2017 article that talks about how the president of Egypt signed a law that would cause a lot of problems for human rights organizations like Amnesty International. So, the host country in question for this campaign is Brazil. So, Brazil's political system is listed as free with a score of 79 out of 100, which is pretty good. They are a democracy, and Freedom House mentions that they do have competitive elections. Two of the biggest things that Freedom House mentions is that, one, there's a lot of issues dealing with corruption, which we'll get to on the next slide, but that'll cause a problem within the political system for Brazil. And the second thing Freedom House mentions is that Brazil had to impeach their president in August 2016, which was right about as the Olympics were about to start. So that would be a major political shift in the middle of right about when this campaign was going to run. And it was addressing a lot of the issues within that particular political administration. So the Corruption Perception Index for 2016, Brazil scored a 40, which is around the world average. The world average is a 43. However, that average still indicates a lot of corruption still. It's pretty indicative of a corrupt environment, according to the Transparency website linked in Module 6. So we do see in 2015 there was a sharp drop from where the corruption or drop in the score, which means a higher amount of corruption from previous years in 2015, with a small increase in 2016. This may be, the cause of the administration that ended up getting impeached in 2016. That's a possibility. So, economic development of Brazil. According to the different economic reports linked in Module 6, Brazil is listed as a developing economy. They are ranked number 66 by IDI as of 2017, but that's an increase from 2016 when it was ranked number 67. One of the reports commented that there was a, quote, sharp decline in output from 2015 and 2016, which would be a problem. And then it also mentions that there's high unemployment and a relatively tight fiscal policy stance that will continue to weigh on the economy. So, one thing I did notice while reading media coverage surrounding the 2016 Olympics was that there was an economic crisis going on in 2016 that was putting a lot of strain on Brazil and its government. And so there were issues with, rationing out what support could go to which sections of the government and all of that. So it wasn't looking great economically there, but I believe it's getting better. So, relatively. Media system is labeled as partly free for their press freedom status by Freedom House. They scored a 47 out of 100 in 2017, which is 1 point up from 46 out of 100 in 2016. One of the issues that they face was violence against journalists. So, Freedom House mentions that in 2016 there were at least 6 reporters murdered in retaliation for their work. So that is definitely something you want to consider, especially when running a PR campaign in this type of environment. You need the media to be able to come out and support your cause, or, not support your cause necessarily, but to come out and cover your cause. So, when journalists are facing crime or, the threat of death and stuff like that in retaliation for their work, that's a significant deterrent to media coverage showing up to your event. Also, there were certain issues that Freedom House brought up, like a blogger who was detained for 4+ months in response to a particular story. So, the media system is not as free as it could be. Literacy rates. So, men, women, both as adults, it ranges between 91% and 92%, which is pretty high. So, that's good. Media penetration. So according to a Statista report, 48% of Brazilians trust the media. And so this is an example of the reach of selected media platforms in a specific city in Brazil. So this particular example shows how out-of-home media is the highest, closely followed by free TV in terms of reach, followed by the internet, which is followed by a slight drop down to radio, and then a sharper drop for pay TV. So to find media penetration, I mostly had to find circulation numbers and TV set numbers and the like. So daily newspapers there are 465 daily newspapers in Brazil with a collective circulation of 7,883,000 people. So this is all according to pressreference.com. But so there are the 465 daily newspapers. There are 2,020 non-daily newspapers, and for TV sets, there are 36,500,000, and per 1,000 people there are 209.2. And then for radio receivers, there are 71 million, which means there are 407 radio receivers per 1,000 people. Internet penetration. This one comes from Freedom House. So in 2017, it was 59.1%. In 2016, it was 57.6%. According to Freedom House, social media / ICT apps are blocked. And Freedom House says bloggers aren't arrested, but the Media Freedoms page mentioned a blogger being detained for 4+ months. So that sort of seems to vary depending on which of these sources you look at. The specific Facebook penetration rate, which is important because Facebook was the most used platform, other than maybe YouTube, for people watching the 2016 Olympics, according to Statista, is 53% in 2016 when this campaign ran, and 61% in 2017. So, for Hofstede's cultural dimensions, collectivism and individualism, these maps are all taken from the link provided in week 6 in that module. So, based on the colors here, you can see that Brazil, with that level of a bright pink, swings a little more towards the middle between collectivist and individualist. So, looking at here, I'm sort of putting it a little bit closer to the collectivist side, just a smidge. Power distance wise, that shade of green looks like it swings close to a larger power distance. For femininity and masculinity, that bright shade of red looks like it's a little more towards the middle with the edge going over to masculine there. For uncertainty avoidance, that shade of brown looks closer to the uncertainty avoiding side of the spectrum. For that shade of green, for long-term orientation, it is closer to the monumentalist side, so the short-term orientation side. And then for the indulgence, with the red color there, it indicates that Brazil is a more indulgent culture. So, the particular campaign that we're looking at here is it was done by Ogilvy and Mather, New York, according to some of the websites illustrating the awards that the campaign won. A quick overview of the campaign. So this campaign focused on the team of 10 athletes that the IOC had compete under the Olympic flag and under the Olympic anthem, because these athletes were refugees who couldn't participate with their home country's teams. So for this particular campaign, the refugee nation, Amnesty International, provided, as if these refugees were their own nation called the refugee nation, provided a flag to unite them, a national anthem to unite them, and then provided materials like a social media filter for, the people watching to offer their support through avenues like social media. So the particular audiences of this campaign. The primary audience would likely be the multinational audience that was watching the summer 2016 Olympics. All eyes in the world were on the Olympics at that time. It's a huge event. And as a subset of that, world leaders who affect policymaking, especially when it comes to the refugee crisis, also would have had their eyes on the Olympics at this point in time. So given the nature of this event, it's very likely that Amnesty International was looking at these as their, primary audiences and a subset of them. Another primary audience would be the International Olympic Committee. And so, especially because there were reports that the refugee nation was circulating a petition that involved the International Olympic Committee potentially allowing, it ended up not going through, the refugee nation to carry, or the refugee team to carry the refugee nation's flag. So the secondary audience would likely be people who weren't watching the Olympics themselves, so they weren't as devoted as the primary audience. They wouldn't be as likely to see this campaign as the primary audience. But it's the people who tuned into media coverage, who tuned into the highlight reels, who saw everything happening after the fact, and not necessarily in real time, or who weren't super invested in what was going on. So the demographics. There were, according to Statista, there were between 14.55 million viewers and 33.63 million viewers per day. So there was an average of 27.5 million primetime viewers in the US alone. And this one particular Statista report of countries with the largest growth of intent to travel during the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio. I am interpreting this title as people who are traveling potentially to the Olympic Games themselves. And so this could indicate a breakdown of the different nationalities represented in the actual stands of the Olympic Stadium. So we see Japan, the US, Thailand, Hungary, Colombia, Australia, Italy, Singapore, Brazil, which could indicate domestic travel throughout the country for the Games, and Greece. So one Statista report on a breakdown of people watching the Olympics in the US based on ethnicity is found in this chart here. So this is obviously biased since it's only the US. This isn't an ethnicity breakdown of, everyone in the world watching the Olympics. I can't quite find that much information. But this is an example for the US alone of what that breakdown looks like. So for social media sites used by these demographics, which is significant because it pertains to how campaigns are viewed, or if anything shows up on social media, where it should be showing up. So one Statista report illustrates that YouTube is the most popular social network among Olympic fans, which is not surprising considering that'd be where most people were watching like highlight reels and stuff like that of events. Second greatest would be Facebook, which is pretty significant. Then it's followed by Twitter, then Instagram, then Google+, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Snapchat, Tumblr, and Reddit's all the way at the bottom there. And then under the second Statista report, which is which social media platforms are you planning to use to stay updated on the Games, Facebook comes in at the highest, followed by Instagram, followed by Twitter, followed by Snapchat, then followed by YouTube and Google+, then Reddit, and then Periscope. So that second report does illustrate a little bit of a switch with YouTube, or at least that's what people were planning on as opposed to what's being reported is what it looks like to be the difference. People may not have anticipated looking up highlights and stuff like that on YouTube as much as they actually did, but both of these illustrate that Facebook is incredibly significant and should be noted as such for anyone who's trying to get their message out during the Olympic Games. So if there's, a social media approach involved, that would be a definite thing to look out for in terms of demographics and psychographics for their primary audiences. So the problem I've found with psychographics for the Olympics is that it's really hard to pin down. The audience is so varied, it's all across the world. It's sort of impossible to pin down an exact set of psychographics just because attitudes, behaviors, values, and all of that vary very much by country. And so from culture to culture, it wouldn't be the same. The most I can say would be that Amnesty International may want to target watchers who are invested in global affairs and motivated to get involved with human rights causes. I mean, in terms of behavior, since that's the sort of organization they are, that might be a good behavior to look at and target. But otherwise, psychographics are all across the map. So, campaign objectives. According to an interview with two of the creative members involved on this campaign run in Forbes magazine, Amnesty International specifically said it wanted this campaign to bring awareness to the refugee cause, to ignite a positive conversation, and to engage the world to support refugees. So these are not particularly measurable objectives, at least not in the way they were presented in that interview. I don't know if behind the scenes they had more measurable goals and objectives, or if they had, any sort of goals in terms of impressions or the like. I'm not sure, I can't find that data. But in terms of what behaviors and attitudes they wanted to see with this campaign, this is what Amnesty International was hoping for. So timeline and budget. The first Facebook post on the Refugee Nation official page for the NGO, for the nonprofit organization, was posted on July 1st, 2016, so about a month before the Olympics began. The credits for the campaign that go through and list the different creative members who worked on it lists the campaign as August 4th, 2016, which would be right before the start of the Olympics. The Olympics themselves, as a major date, ran from August 5th, 2016 to August 21st, 2016. And I am admittedly unclear on how long they intended this campaign to run for, because it's sort of indefinite. It's technically still continuing today. Those flags still appear today. They still appear, around the world in different places, which I'll get into later. But, so the goal was to support Team Refugee during the Olympics themselves, but the actual flag and anthem have continued on after the fact. As for the budget, it sounds like they had absolutely no budget to speak of. One of the PR practitioners specifically mentioned that they were like pirates, working on no budget for this campaign. So, themes and key messages. The overall theme was basically supporting refugees, both in the Olympic Games and out of them. So, there were a lot of messages about supporting Team Refugee. The hashtag that was being used a lot was Go Refugee Nation, and the hashtag Team Refugee, Go Refugee Nation also appeared at the end of their campaign videos and the like. Some of the language on their Facebook and social media posts mentioned witnessing the rise of a new nation. And so, focusing on the refugee nation unfurling this flag, standing with them, as their own nation and the like. One of the major quotes said by the artist who designed the flag was about standing in solidarity. Her goal when she designed the flag was to offer this image of solidarity, this message of solidarity. So that was a big focal point. That quote gets used quite often. Currently on their website are the hashtags Refugees Matter and Refugees Welcome. And one of the lines on their website right now is Stand with the refugees, stand against division. So all of these messages and the theme of this is basically solidarity with the refugee cause and, bringing refugees into safe places. So, action and special events that were used to attract attention. According to certain sources, I believe Wired was the one who said that there were thousands of flags distributed around Rio with the intent of these people waving them to support the refugee nation. There was a petition to allow the athletes to carry the flag that targeted the IOC. There was flags sent to Olympic athletes. They were allowed to be delivered even though the athletes weren't going to carry them, in like official processions and stuff like that. There were Facebook and social media posts during the actual Olympics. There were not very many. It wasn't like a super involved social media campaign. And the main focal point of this campaign was the flag that was designed by a refugee artist and an anthem that was composed by a refugee. So those were the two main focal points. Everything else in this campaign, everything else done, revolved entirely around these two actions and stirring up awareness of these two actions, with these two actions being the symbolic heart of this campaign. So one other thing was that there was a social media filter, which is what you see depicted here to the right, that was created for this campaign and to illustrate solidarity with Team Refugee. There were also downloadable flags and the like posted on the Refugee Nation website. These downloadable flags, certain sources were mentioning that these flags could be printed out and waved by people actually in the Olympic Stadium to show support. And then another thing that was done for this campaign was there's several campaign videos posted on the Refugee Nation's website. And these campaign videos we'll look at a little bit later. So some of the media channels, other than posting to Facebook and posting to Twitter, one of the Refugee Nation's particular YouTube videos shows, it claims that, they got over 2 billion impressions, and it lists a ton of different print and internet media sources. So, like you can see in this particular picture that they were, this is a screenshot of one of their videos to show just some of the names of outlets that ran the story about this campaign. And, the claim that there's over 2 billion impressions is impressive in terms of reach, but it's unsurprising given the giant nature of this event and the giant international nature of the event being covered. So, in terms of specific implementation, so what I'm looking at here is some of the Facebook posts from before the actual Olympics started. So some of this is talking about witness the rise of a new nation, expect us soon. These ones seem like more like they're hyping up the event as they're approaching it and hyping up their desire to unfurl the flag there and to drum up support before the Olympics begin. So this is sort of like the introduction to their cause and the introduction to what they're looking to do. And some of what they do, and a lot of what they do both now and throughout the entire Olympics, is they put faces and names to a lot of the team refugee athletes, and ended up sharing these athletes' stories on Facebook and Twitter and the like. So that was really useful in terms of being able to put a name and a face and personal elements involved and affected by the refugee crisis, and bringing these names and faces to the forefront. So those are some of the examples here. And then some of the examples here are run during the actual Olympics themselves. So these are highlighting, for some of them, the specific events and specific athletes from Team Refugee. In some of their posts, some of them are showing, like down here in the bottom right, they're showing people in the stands waving the Refugee Nation flag. And the post on the far left illustrates that the black and orange banner for their flag, they wanted to be able to look at the opening ceremony and quote-unquote virtually raise their flag there. So in solidarity with any of the other flags being represented. So we're going to see if technology is going to cooperate and show this first campaign video.
These refugee athletes have no national team to belong to. They have no flag to march behind. They have no national anthem to be played. Therefore, we will welcome these refugee athletes to the Olympic Games with the Olympic flag and with the Olympic anthem.
أنا لا أكتب موسيقى فقط لشعوب المنطقة للعرب أو الكرد أو الأتراك، بل أكتبها لكل العالم.
Black and orange is a symbol of solidarity with all these brave souls that had to cross the sea to look for safety in a new country. Since I had to wear one, also I have a personal engagement with these with the live vest, with these two colors.
All right, so to me, that's a really powerfully done video. I think it was, gorgeously put together in terms of how all of these scenes were shot. I appreciate the emphasis on the only sound you hear being, for the most part, the music. Occasionally there's quotes from the head of the IOC or from the artist and the composer directly involved in the project, but for the most part, they're allowing, the music to strike an emotional chord with the viewer. It's a very dramatic video and a very well done one, I think. I think it hits home in the way that Amnesty International intended. So this next campaign video, to me, appears to be done post-campaign, because this is the one that mentions, this one in particular mentions, like, the impressions, and it shows footage of, like, the Olympic Games themselves. So this, to me, says that this one was done after the campaign ended, but it's also a very interesting video, so we're going to play this one as well.
For the first time ever, a refugee team was going to compete in the Olympics. 10 athletes with no national team, no flag, and no anthem to call their own. The whole world was looking at them. How could we make the world look to the millions they are representing?
The Olympic refugees have been making a name for themselves, and now they may have a flag.
Essa bandeira aqui é a bandeira dos refugiados, e a inspiração veio das cores do colete salva-vidas.
We partnered with refugees across the globe. Together, we created a flag and an anthem to represent the athletes.
Black and orange is a symbol of solidarity with all these brave souls that had to cross the sea to look for safety in a new country.
Refugee athletes embraced the national symbol.
Eu também vou levar a bandeira do meu time, refugiado.
The crowd got 2 new colors to cheer for. And in the world's biggest display of nationalism, we finally raised a flag for those who were forced to leave their own countries. From Lesbos to Kakuma, refugee camps now shared a symbol of hope.
Bandeira para os refugiados significa muito.
For the first time ever, a symbolic nation was officially recognized at the One Young World Summit. Exhibited at MoMA and Victoria and Albert Museum.
We live in such a visual world now that people will start to recognize the flag with the discussion.
The flag is in the permanent collection of the Vienna Museum now because it marks a crucial moment in the contemporary history.
Alright, so this video illustrates the after effects of this campaign pretty well. So it shows, for example, the cultural spread of the flag after the Olympics were done. It illustrates, the flag itself being symbolized around the world outside of the Olympics. So it shows how this campaign affected other areas of the world outside of the contained event of the Olympics. So overall, the host country didn't have as much of an effect on this campaign in terms of culture. So because this campaign was geared towards a global audience as opposed to specifically a Brazilian one, the way to look at this campaign isn't necessarily through the effect of Brazil's culture. That, however, does not mean that Brazil's environment wouldn't affect this campaign at all. So, for example, we talked about the issues of violence against reporters earlier, and that's a sort of issue that could deter reporters from attending major events. So in this case, I think Amnesty International is just lucky that the Olympics was such a major event. Reporters from around the world had to show up. They couldn't miss it, which was definitely a good thing for Amnesty International. But I think in a lot of other situations, it may not have worked out quite as well. So another way that Brazil's environment would have affected this campaign is that a lot of the coverage I was seeing from the months leading up to the Olympics in Rio talked about a lot of Brazil-specific issues that were being exposed by media attention. And so this kind of exposure could have caused some competition for media coverage on human rights issues. So, for example, there were a lot of issues on, there were a lot of articles on, crime rates or, safety concerns, which would have been huge for the people traveling there. There was a lot of coverage on economics, cases of Zika, the actual infrastructure in Brazil. There was a lot focusing on the state of Brazil itself. And so looking at any, human rights concerns in that country could have potentially detracted from media coverage on the particular refugee nation element. So that's also a possibility. That's a hypothetical, though. I'm not 1,000% sure on, the effect of how much would have been deterred or not. So the global PR aspects of this campaign, and this is really where we see the multinational elements come into play. Amnesty International, as an NGO that's inherently biased with Western values and approaches, because they're based in London. They're inherently a Western organization that's going to focus on causes Western nations deem important in a way, or at least the way they look at and view these things, of what they want to bring into the forefront and what they want to bring to light. So like we talked about several modules ago, especially with the textbook chapters, on how NGOs present their causes and their topics to raise awareness, and how those methods can be inherently harmful or biased. And one good thing I think that this campaign did really well was that they incorporated actual refugees from affected countries into the design of this campaign. So I do think this accommodates for and offsets the Western biases involved, because it's not just the Western-based NGO saying, well, this is how we want to draw attention to this campaign. No. They brought people actually affected by the situation in to design the flag and to design the anthem. So those are incredibly significant in terms of, how these people wanted their own personal cause to be represented to the world. And one particular thing that did also have to be taken into account was what language the national anthem for the refugee nation would be in. And in this case, the composer chose a wordless anthem to avoid potential language barriers and to provide a much more universal symbol for this anthem. And so another thing to consider is that since this is such a multinational and global campaign, the reach of this campaign can be limited depending on varying countries' internet and media penetration. So, people are watching the Olympics all over the world, but it's probably going to reach the countries and the primary audiences the most in countries with higher rates of media and internet penetration. So that can influence heavily on who sees this campaign and who's affected by this campaign in that sense. So the circuit of culture, how this all plays in terms of regulation. The refugee nation wanted to see the flag and anthem used in Olympic ceremonies, but it didn't happen because of the IOC regulatory body. For production, representation, and consumption, which I'm sort of putting these all into the same category here to look at everything together, the meaning behind the flag and anthem. So the flag and anthem are symbolic to many, like a general flag and anthem are symbolic to many nations around the world. It's inherent in their in their countries' identities. And so, since so many people so closely associate and affiliate with their own national anthem and national flag, it makes a lot of sense to draw attention to a particular cause by using something that so many people, no matter where they're from, consider significant. So it doesn't matter what culture you're from and how you're looking at, how you look at the world or how you understand the world. No matter what you understand what it means to have a national flag and a national anthem, that's a very universal symbol across the entire world. So in a way, it's easily translatable and easily understood no matter who is watching, which I think is one of the best parts of this campaign, is just the fact that it can be understood so universally. And in terms of identity, so the identity that the refugee nation promoted was they revolved around the stories of refugees. It was, putting faces and names to the personal stories of refugees, and particularly the refugee athletes involved in the Olympics. And so this identity very much was important to the cause. It's bringing this, identity to the forefront to illustrate these are the people who are heavily affected by this cause, and this is, who you need to be listening to. So my evaluation of this campaign, the Forbes interview with the PR professionals who worked on this campaign, one of them mentioned that, quote, in just a few months after its release, the project earned over 4.5 billion media impressions, end quote. That's great. That's phenomenal in terms of impressions. The question, of course, then becomes, how many people actually read what it was about, how many people actually looked into the cause further, and how many people were just scrolling through a Facebook feed and, saw it real quick and then blew on by. That's really the question here. Social media engagement doesn't appear to be very high on the Facebook page. So like you could see in some of the screenshots I was posting earlier of their Facebook posts, their shares and their likes weren't very high. Likes were ranging between, 20-something likes on some posts to, maybe 100 on another. And, it didn't look like there was a ton of engagement going on, given how many millions of people were actually watching the Olympics, which isn't great, honestly, especially when you have dedicated hashtags to this event, and especially when you have a dedicated social media filter to this event. So, and that's also especially not good, because the reason I was looking into Facebook so much was just because Facebook, as we saw earlier in the demographics page, was listed as one of the top platforms that people were following the 2016 Summer Olympics on. So if it's not there, and I also checked into Twitter, and, I can scroll all the way back to August 2016 with this hashtag really quickly, and, a lot of the posts are either from the refugee nation, or, you had posts replying to, or, posts from people who were also in solidarity with the refugee nation, but it wasn't like there were thousands upon thousands of them. However, one thing I did notice was that Facebook comments appear to be in a variety of languages, so the campaign definitely reached a wider audience, and it seemed to be picked up on by, people no matter what country they were in. So that is a good thing, and that's definitely, a better element of this campaign. Like I said earlier, that it was so easily translatable no matter where you're from. I do believe this is one of those things that illustrates that fact. So the cultural response looks pretty good. One of the Refugee Nation videos, for example, mentions that an actor was at the Oscars wearing a Refugee Nation pin. He had a flag pin. And so that shows this campaign working its way into the public eye in that way. Or like we saw in the one, post-campaign video, that the Refugee Nation flag is hanging in museums now. So this shows a good cultural response. And this shows, and like we saw in pictures in the protests, in the campaign video, that people were holding, the flag or signs with the flag on them. This does illustrate that this campaign was visible in the public eye. It's been incorporated by the people who were looking at these types of issues, who were following these types of issues. It's resonating strongly with those people. So just my concern would be, through the social media engagement, how much further did you reach beyond that audience with this campaign? And also in terms of evaluation, because, I don't know the precise measurement goals that Amnesty International and the Refugee Nation were hoping for. I can't find that data anywhere. But in terms of igniting a positive conversation based on the number of media outlets we saw listed in one of the campaign videos, and based on, the some social media interaction with this topic, we can see they definitely did start a conversation. They definitely did, bring this conversation, to the forefront. It does seem to have sparked that positive conversation primarily, I think, through the media outlets more so than social media, but maybe not as widely as they'd hoped, is the impression I get right now. So in summary, Amnesty International wanted to raise awareness for the 2016, for the refugee crisis in 2016, because the summer 2016 Summer Olympics had a refugee athletic team. This provided a great opportunity to unfurl a flag and a national anthem for the refugee nation. And the Olympics provided this flag and national anthem plenty of visibility and media coverage. Also, there was a social media filter and downloadable flags to wave. People could print out and wave in the stands and the like. But I have no statistics on how many times those flags were downloaded or how many people in the stands were actually waving these flags. That's not something I can find. So, key takeaways, at least for me, lessons I learned from this was that taking advantage of special media-worthy events that your organization does not have to run can definitely help your cause get a lot of coverage, especially from major media outlets. That's definitely going to get your story out there. The question for me becomes, if no one's engaging with you on social media may not be necessary to have a cultural impact, but it can be good to help spread a campaign. And when your goal is to start a conversation, it can be a very powerful way to do so. So social media needs to be taken into account a lot more than I think it was. So recommendations. So, like I said, I can't actually see if they had measurable objectives for this particular campaign. In the event that they didn't, I would recommend more specific evaluation metrics set down at the beginning of the campaign. And I would also add a suggestion on, bringing messaging in on adjusting policy or more messaging that's geared towards world leaders specifically, because I feel like that's kind of a missed opportunity with this. Just because you had the eyes of the entire world on the Olympics where this campaign was running, and that does include the eyes of the people in charge of this policy, and it doesn't seem like there was any messaging to differentiate that potential primary audience from the general primary audience of just normal everyday citizens who were also watching the Olympics. And I think that distinction could have been really useful. My third recommendation is to incorporate social media as a free and powerful tool to work on that conversation starting. That was one of the goals of this campaign. So to get it more involved, to use the hashtag more, to engage with more people as possible, and see if that can't help pick up the conversation even more than it already has been in the culture itself. So here's page 1 of my works cited, page 2 of my works cited, image sources, and then that's all I have. Thank you guys so much for listening to my presentation.